еще не имел в виду, что мы начинаем. Мы только микрофон настраиваем. Нет, там просто бренды очень важная вещь, так сказать. Если неправильный бренд, придется видео все переписывать. Потому что торговые марки дело серьезное. Да? Все, а теперь начинаем.
Good morning. My name is Marina Danchina. I'm the main organizer of the conference from university. I will help you during these days. If you have any question, don't hesitate to ask me and our team. I'm very happy to meet you in our university. I wish you have good and useful days. So let's start now. The first speaker is Yuri Borovin, the Vice Rector for Scientific and Innovative Work.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые гости. Мы рады приветствовать вас от лица руководства нашего университета.
Hello, dear guests. We are happy to have you here in Moscow Polytechnic University.
Да, большое хотим спасибо сказать организаторам, что они на нашей базе вот уже второй раз проводят мероприятие. На этом надеемся, что это и дальше будет проводиться у нас.
First of all, we would like to thank all the organizers for choosing us as the place to have the conference, and we are here for the second time, and we hope that organizers will continue trusting us with organizing such a great event.
Ну, а вам хотелось пожелать плодотворной работы, ну и, соответственно, получения удовольствия от нее.
And I would like to wish you fruitful work and to have good mood here in Moscow Polytechnic University.
Спасибо.
Thank you. And now it's time to invite Rostislav, founder of this conference. So.
Okay. Thank you, Marina. Could you please turn on my slides? Yes. No, I feel too far from the audience. Let's come closer to people. So, organizing conference is a fun, and AIST was initiated like 7+ years ago, and the reason was quite simple. I joined some startup on social network analysis, and we had some ideas, and then we decided, okay, why not to publish something on a scientific conference? Do we have a scientific research conference on social network analysis in Russia? It turned out that there is no conference on social network analysis in Russia at that time. Okay, why don't create one? So it was kind of a startup idea, and I really thankful to Dmitry Ignatov, who worked and now works for High School of Economics, and at the time I worked for industry, and he's this idea, and Alexander Pachenko was kind of among the first participants, and Mikhail Khachay was really kind of a host of this conference for many years at Yekaterinburg. So this team is kind of, so it's not me who is the founder of the conference. All the four are responsible and kind of accountable. And when people ask me, is it difficult to organize a good conference? I usually answer it's very similar to organizing a birthday. Birthday party can't fail. because you finally will have your birthday, and it doesn't matter how many people will come. If you just one your close friend come, you will have a nice birthday with your best friend. If kind of all your friends come, you will have like hundreds. It will be another kind of party, but again, birthday will be good. So organizing conference is very similar. We just invite people who like the idea, like the topic. People come, we communicate, collaborate, cooperate, and that's the reason. So it's simple. Okay, some technical details, but otherwise it's rather simple. So yes, outline of my rather short presentation. I will tell some general formal facts which I have to tell about selection procedure. And this year we decided to initiate some new project. We call it Map of Data Science in Russia. And I'll show you some initial pictures, just because presentation without good pictures is not a good presentation, right? So, as I told you, we started in 2012, and it was really a stress to publish call for papers, because it's a fresh conference, you never know who will apply. So I kept my finger crossed, and my internal benchmark was, if you have 20 submissions, then we will have a conference. If less, then it will not be okay. But finally we got 49 submissions, and it was really, really great. And people who work for different projects know that usually the second project is the most difficult, because you already have some success, you believe you can do it, it's simple, but it's not that simple. And the second conference was really, really challenge. And here I cannot mention, not to mention Katya Chernyak, who will be invited speaker here, because she was really the person who was very crucial for the second conference. Then you see the third one was already a success, almost double participants. And 2015 we decided to switch to English. That was a quite difficult decision. It took maybe a couple of months of discussions. Why should we switch to English? Because, you know, there are kind of positive factors and negative factors. Positive factors, if you switch to English, do we have enough people who are kind of have good enough English to write a scientific paper? But anyway, it was a success. You see another double figures. So we got 140 submissions for 2 years, and for 2 years we published our proceedings in Springer CCIS series, which is kind of targeted at regional conferences. It was already Springer, it was already indexed in all major systems. And 2 years ago it was another decision to switch to lecture notes in computer science. The lecture notes in computer science, we have anonymous reviewers, so now reviewers don't know the authors of the papers. And okay, some basic facts about Springer lecture notes. It's indeed the top series, and I'm really proud to know that we are the first Russian-based conference in data science with lecture notes in computer science proceedings. So, okay, so we'll have main volume in Springer, and here are some numbers. So 107 submissions, 26 papers rejected just for some, I would say, formal reasons. Then 29 papers among 81 are selected. Okay, so, and besides we'll have a poster session for those who kind of have ideas not good enough to get to proceedings, but good enough to share, to get feedback, and this is a really important part. So, here I had to make a font smaller just to fit all the program co-chairs into one slide. So, initially, conference started with just 3 tracks. It's clear, right? We had track on images, networks, and text. Now we have already 6 tracks, and this is not a limit. And each track, you can see, has at least one internationally recognized reviewer outside of Russia. Not reviewer, I mean co-chair. This is really important for us to have this international focus. Okay, then some statistics. Surely we have a lot of reviewers from Russia, but also quite many from China, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, United States, and other countries. So it's really international program committee. And besides the main proceedings, we plan to have a companion volume, which will be published in series. It's usually also indexed by Scopus, and here is some graphs on sections. So you see, we have quite many applications on natural language processing, and just remember this part because it will be important on my next slide. So you see, we have quite a lot on natural language processing and analysis of images and video and other topics. So, okay. Joseph here, it's really, I'm really thankful for him because his company, Exact Pro Systems, is a gold sponsor of our conference, and I'm really thankful for regular support. And also we have, this year we have some contribution from Springer and JetBrains and also other partners. And another important part, this year we have a hackathon on blockchain data and social media and text analysis. It will run in parallel. It will start in half an hour after the section. So those of you who don't know what to do next 2 days, so in parallel with visiting sessions, you can participate in hackathon and get some valuable prizes and contacts and experience. Yes, and yes, we are also thankful to our host. And now a couple of words about our projects on map of data science in Russia. It's done in collaboration with my colleagues from High School of Economics, Tamara Voznesenskaya and Kirill Rudakov, and here's just the result. Just enjoy. We plan to print it and put it maybe here tomorrow or so. Maybe slightly explanations. So the balls are data scientists, and they are colored according to regions in Russia. So red ones are from Moscow, pink are central Russia, like cities around Moscow, like Belgorod, Tula, Tver, etc. The northwest is mostly St. Petersburg, Kyiv, but mostly St. Petersburg. Volga region includes Kazan, Nizhny Novgorod, and other cities. So then South Russia, it's mostly Rostov. And Ural is Yekaterinburg, Chelyabinsk. And Siberia and East, it's Siberia and East, okay. So by observing the color, you can figure out which topics are more developed in different regions. And the size of the circle is proportional to the number of citations in Google Scholar. So here, all Russian scientists with the number of citations greater than 100 are listed. So you can see that quite many people in Russia are already doing data science. And then you can observe some particular fields. Again, it's not a kind of final research because it's we used the keywords which people use themselves in presenting them to Google Scholar. But anyway, it provides some statistics. And you can see that natural language processing is kind of undeveloped field. You see it on the top. And I'm really like that our conference works in the direction to make this area much more developed in Russia. Okay, that's all. So any questions, comments, you can ask me during coffee breaks. I'll be here today, tomorrow, and on Saturday. And so let's begin. And now, okay, now a small organization. So those of you who came for hackathon, now please go to the different place. Yes, please. Да, ребята, у кого там, значит, все какие-то печати в этот самый, в командировочный, вот Александр, как бы главный с Мариной, как бы по всем вопросам к ним, да? Sorry for Russian, very Russian specific, как бы, bureaucracy. Yes? One more? Да, если кто-то есть на хакатон, да, можно выйти, дальше начнется хардкорная наука. Вот. Значит, потому что хакатон будет в другой аудитории. So now we switch to hardcore computer science, and those of you who came for hackathon, please go to the hall, and then you'll get the directions. So let me invite our first speaker, Anna, please. Можно включить презентацию, да?
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm always really happy when I get the chance to talk about process mining. Process mining is a relatively new topic, so many of you are experts in all kinds of data analytics and data science techniques like text mining, data mining. Process mining is much younger discipline. It emerged maybe 15 years ago on the research side, so around 99, 98. In the Netherlands at the Technical University in Eindhoven. And it has been in commercial use now for maybe 5 or 6, 7 years around that time. And so it's a really nice topic that's very complementary to all those statistics and data mining topics that already exist, because it looks at data, but it looks at data from a process perspective. Right? So we are trying to discover processes from data with process mining. And I'm Anne Rozinat, I'm a co-founder of Flaxicon. We are a process mining software company. And I myself have been involved in the area already for more than 15 years. I became enthusiastic about it as a student, studying software engineering, then did my PhD in the process mining group at the Technical University in Eindhoven with Professor Will van Aalst. And after the PhD, we started Flaxicon to make process mining software for business users. And we're still very active also in basically teaching people how to apply process mining in practice. And basically I want to give you an overview today, first what is process mining, but also then give a little bit of an overview of the use cases that we see at different companies. So let's get started. Everyone talks about data analytics and big data today, right? And process mining, you could say it started 150 years ago, where if we look at the time back then all the trade was going through the sea, so there was a lot of ships. There were a lot of ships transporting all kinds of goods to people who were waiting on them, and so the ships really were the bottleneck of getting those goods to the people. So one guy called Matthew Maury was actually the first one who discovered that there was a lot of data that they could use from the logbooks, which were stored in the US Naval Observatory. So there they had an archive where the captains were leaving all those logbooks, and nobody was doing anything with those kind of books, right? You see an example how they looked like. There was information about the position, but also the winds and the currents that captains wrote down. And his team basically looked at those logbooks, and they were analyzing the data for the first time and inferring patterns from that and routes. And what they did based on their data in the end is they created what they called sailing directions. And this is how they looked like. These were essentially books with maps of the sea and with extra information on those maps, right, regarding the winds and currents information. So essentially this enabled captains at sea to plan their routes. And one of the first one who was using that was the captain of the DC Wright, who on a trip from Baltimore to Rio de Janeiro came back 1 month earlier. So this shows the impact that this has had on the planning, and 5 years later everyone was using it, and nobody was going without those maps anymore, and it brought in like $10 million in extra revenue through all those extra trips that people could make. So I like that as an introduction for process mining, because with process mining we're in a similar situation. We're also looking at log data. This data is being recorded by processes that are being performed. And also here, we are often the first ones who look at that data and try to analyze it in a structured way, and otherwise it's just lying there and nobody is really doing something with it. But of course, we are not looking at log books like Mauri did, but we're looking at transaction traces, right? Transaction data from processes that are being performed. And we're not making maps out of them, but we are making process maps out of them that show how the process was performed. So in a nutshell, this is what process mining is about, but it still doesn't answer the question, why do we want to do this, right? So to understand that, we have to see that usually if you talk to someone in a company and you ask them, how do you work, right? How does the process work? Typically the answer is relatively simple. First we do this, then we do that, then we do that. Maybe there's a choice point here or there also, but relatively structured. While in reality, processes are much more complicated, right? So there's rework, things have to be done again because they weren't right the first time. Different people perform the same process in different ways. So we have this discrepancy between the process, how you think it is happening, and what is happening in reality. Now, if you look at this gap, right, the difference between these two sides, then it is curious to ask yourself, well, why are we putting so much time and money in modeling all these processes? I'm not sure whether you know that, how close you are to those initiatives, but almost all companies today, they have extensive process mapping initiatives where they are modeling their processes and documenting how the processes should go in languages like BPMN or in tools like AIST, and basically really to document those processes. And it's really a good question, because what you see here, for example, is like a kind of a third of a documented process of a German electronics manufacturer where we did a project a few years back. And so it's like all the horizontal lines, they're like swim lanes, so different units of the organization who are involved. And they had some problems with this refund process. And the manager who was responsible for this process, he came into the meeting, he had like a big piece of paper with this modeled process, and he put it on the table. And while he was putting it on the table, he said, well, yeah, but that's not really our process. So he knew that there was this disconnect, right, between what was on paper and what was really happening. And of course, it does not mean that these kind of maps, that they are useless. They have a very good purpose. They're really good as a reference point to communicate how the process should be, as to train new employees, for example. But what they do not help you with is to solve any operational problems, right? If customers are calling and saying that the process is taking too long or they are not getting their refunds on time, the documented process will not help you at all. So if we look back at this picture, actually this gap between these two sides is not the biggest problem, right? Because in a way you can say it's expected or just a matter of how it is, that it will not be possible that everything is perfect all the time, right? Sometimes a mistake happens and it has to be corrected. So there will be some deviations. The much bigger problem is that usually nobody really has an overview about how the process in reality looks like. And why is this so difficult? So some of the reasons that we hear most frequently are summarized on this slide, where first of all, what you're dealing with is a lot of subjective opinions, right? So traditionally, the way processes are documented is by talking to people, asking them how they work, having workshops and interview sessions, and essentially what you're trying to do is to piece together like an as objective as possible picture out of a lot of subjective pieces of a puzzle. So that's a big challenge in these kind of workshops. In addition, specifically for processes, it's never just one person performing the whole process from the beginning to the end, but it's always multiple people involved, different teams, often multiple companies even, who work together to deliver the end product or the service for the customer, and everyone knows very well what they're doing in their immediate environment, but they have little understanding of what happens before or afterwards in the same process. So, and on top of that, there's changes in the process. So maybe there's new legislation or internal restructuring. And yeah, so that means that even if you perfectly document today, 4 or 5 years later down the road, it's no longer the case. So process mining, yeah, is addressing that fact. And the problem is, like, if you get complaints about the process, for example, in your refund process, customers are calling you, what do, right? If you just have a documented process map, that doesn't help you with that. Typically what happens, people have to rely on their intuition or gut feeling. And that's more or less the same like the captains were doing before the Maori maps were there, right? They had their own experience from being on sea for 20 years or something to make decisions, but they didn't have those maps available to make better decisions or more objective information to make these better decisions. And if we're talking about intuition or gut feeling, it's important, I think, to emphasize that often we are also right about these intuitions, right? It's not that it's always false. Yes, sometimes you see people who work in the same process for maybe 30 years or 25 years, so they know exactly what's also wrong with they can tell you exactly what should be different and where the problems are. And sometimes they have the problem that they cannot make themselves heard, or people don't pay attention to what they are saying, right? But at the same time, our intuition, it can also be wrong, right? It's to illustrate that, I have a story here which is illustrated from This American Life, which is a radio show on which they were telling the story of Robert and Tamar. And essentially Robert and Tamar remember the same story a little bit differently. So first Robert tells it like this, right? He said, well, it was a sunny day, we were walking by the Central Park, and then on the other side of the street there was Jackie Onassis, back then President Kennedy's wife, waving at them, and they couldn't believe it, right? Oh wow, she's waving at them, and very tentatively, a little bit, Tamar started waving back, and Jackie waved back even more, and then they realized that she was actually calling a taxi, right? But that's not the story, right? The story is how Tamar actually remembers the story differently compared to Robert, because there were 3 main differences. And the first one was that there were actually a lot of people on the other side who were observing this misunderstanding, and Tamar really remembers it very clearly because it was very embarrassing for her that they all saw her, let's say, mistaking that waving for wave to her. Secondly, it was a different location. It was actually Madison Avenue, so that's quite a big change already, completely different place. But the biggest change was, or difference was, that Robert wasn't there. He was actually not with her that day. It was something that happened to her, and she of course told him about it when she came home, and then over the years he must have transformed himself into the story somehow, because they were sitting at a dinner table with friends and he was telling the story as if he was in the situation. And on the way home she said to him, well, but Robert, you weren't there, and he couldn't believe it. He said, well, but I remember it so clearly, right? It's like, maybe you know that from yourself. Sometimes you don't know, did I dream that, or did that really happen, right? So that is a challenge, that memory can be unreliable, and that is also why when you talk to people, you always have this bias, right? So when you ask them about the process, and often some people focus on the exceptions, the things that didn't go well last week, and others focus on other things, so you always have this kind of a challenge. So process mining can help to address that by making it more objective, right? So by looking at what's really happening. And by doing that, it can also help to resolve some conflicts, because sometimes people have kind of different opinions, right? And then they're basically not getting anywhere because of those different opinions. You can't resolve them in a good way. So with process mining, you can find this objective way of doing that. And essentially, you're getting kind of this right side of the picture. That's what process mining provides. And it's by doing that, you can then still draw different conclusions, right? That's an important thing to realize. Process mining does not say anything about whether this is good or bad, right? You can go both sides, because it can be that on the left side, you see the process how it has to be. So then you're looking for deviations on the right side. But it can also be the other way around, that you actually learn something about the real process that you didn't know before. So you're updating your own understanding of the process based on how the process is working in reality. And sometimes you also will remain with a certain discrepancy on both sides, because it's not always the goal to have like the exact picture on top of each other, because you don't always want to document every little exception, for example. And in process mining, if you look at all the orders, for example, for 1 year, you will see every little deviation, every little exception will pop up. And you don't necessarily want to have that in your documented process. So process mining fills this gap. That's the core contribution. And so the next question then is, how does it work, right? Like we said in the beginning, it's a data analysis technique. So rather than manually documenting and modeling the process like companies are doing it today, we are starting from the data. And to look at the data, we are looking at the data from a process perspective. So we need some kind of mental model, some framework to do this. And to explain the process mining mental model, let's first look at a different mental model as a comparison. So for example, if we look at a classification, a simple classification example, where you can apply a classification algorithm to learn which customers are buying a product of yours and which ones aren't, then you have like one row as a training example for the classification algorithm, and the outcome could be, for example, a decision tree where you can read off the rules for which kind of customers are buying your product or not. Right? So with process mining, we have a slightly different meta model, because we are looking at processes, and the process is a sequence of activities. So a single row is not a full example yet. We need to look at multiple rows for a full example. So for that, we need the case ID, the case identifier, to correlate all the events that belong to the same case. And one case is one example in the process mining world. And then we need information about the activity name to see which steps are happening, and a timestamp. So there are these 3 requirements: case ID, activity name, and timestamp. So these are the 3 things that we are looking for if we want to apply process mining. And the nice thing is that it's not specific to any kind of system. You can find this in basically everywhere. Every process and every information system somehow has this information. Sometimes it's easy to get it, right? So if you have a workflow system or an IT service management system or some kind of issue tracker like Jira or something, you can get it quite easily out and just put it in the process mining tool. But if you have some other legacy systems, or the process goes across multiple IT systems, sometimes it can be more work to put it together. So the goal is to put it in a format similar to this, and then you can apply process mining. And how process mining works is illustrated with a simple example here. Let's say we have an ordering process where customers can buy products from our company, and all the steps that are taken in this process are recorded over time in the database. Now we take this data out of the database, for example, export it as a CSV file and put it into the process mining tool. Now within the process mining tool, what is happening is the following. First of all, you correlate all the cases based on the case ID. So for example, this is one customer who went through this process. First, the order was completed, we have received the payment, step B. Step C means we have shipped the product to the customer, and so on and so forth. Right? Now if we look at customer number 2, then we see the process was similar, but not exactly the same. If you look closely, you see that B and C happened in a different order. So maybe, we know this customer already, and we know they will pay, so we ship the product before we've received the payment. It's like a variation of the initial process. And if we look at customer number 3, we see that there's a repetition of activity D, so maybe we had a mistake on the invoice, we had to correct this mistake, and we had to send it out again. So we get these variants out of the data, but with process mining we want to go one step further. We want to see how does the overall process actually look like. And if we would do this just for the first case, we get a simple sequential process, but as soon as we incorporate the second one, we get this variation also in the process map. And with the third one, we get this little loop around activity D. Right? So in a nutshell, this is how it works. We take the raw data and we directly derive the process map, visualizing how the process works. And now it's going to be a little bit of a challenge because I had to connect my laptop. I want to give you a short demo to make it more tangible, to show you an example like how this looks like. So I will go upstairs. I will keep talking to the microphone, but you won't see me. But I will be in the back. One second.
You know, regarding that, I had a joke. Did you visit a church and organ music? We decided to kind of steal that style. So the real person is upstairs and invisible. And you only enjoy the music of data science, and the slides. And okay, so organization is never perfect, but that's by design. So, okay, so I'll be, you can, so don't leave the audience. We continue.
Okay, you can still hear me? Yes, okay. So it starts with the data, right? So for example, here I have just an example data set. It can be, for example, a CSV file or Excel file or something where we have these three elements that I just mentioned, right? So here, for example, we have a case ID, which is a purchase order number for this purchasing process. We see there are 8 lines all related to purchase order 339. We see an activity column with information about the different steps. We see a start and a complete timestamp. So, I'm in the way actually. We have some extra information. So let's say we have received complaints about this, the throughput time for this process. So we start, this is the process mining software, Disco, right? Disco stands for discovering the process based on data, which is what we are going to do now. So I'm opening this file with this information. And the first thing we see is we get a preview of what's in the file. And what we can do here is we create a mapping to those 3 minimum requirements, right? We say this is our case ID column. We can say this here at the top. We can say this is our activity name. And then the timestamps have already been automatically detected. So once we have created this mapping to these 3 elements, we can start the import. And so we don't know anything about the process. We don't have a map or a visualization, just the historical data that you see on the screen here. And we're starting the import, and the process mining tool is mining the process, right? I'll zoom in a little bit to explain to you how you can read the map. So it starts at the top, and we can see that there are 608 cases, all starting with the step create purchase requisition. So this is the beginning of the process. And afterwards, the process splits into 2 alternative paths. 374 times we are going this way, 234 times we are going this way. Right, so the numbers, the thickness of the arrows, the coloring, all this shows the frequency, how frequently certain parts of the process are performed. And what we can see is that actually there's a big loop here around this activity, amend request for quotation, which is a surprise for us because we thought this could happen sometimes, but this is actually a step where we have to make a change to an existing request. And this is something that should only happen in rare situations, but we are doing it more than 500 times for just 608 cases. So this is a big waste and already an insight for us that we can look into. Now, the maps that you get with process mining, they become very complicated very quickly. So what we can do is we can also interactively determine the level of detail we want to see for them. For example, if I pull down the activity slider to the lowest point, I will get to see just a high-level view of the process with the activities of the most frequent variant, right? And then I can gradually bring in some of the more less frequently performed steps until at 100% I see everything that was performed, but I still see a simplified view of the process where if you look here to the left side, we see the activity amend purchase requisition was performed 11 times, but the numbers don't add up yet, right? Maybe some of you noticed that if you add them up, you don't get to 100% yet. So for example, we come in here 11 times, we go out 8 times, so there's still 3 missing somewhere. And the reason is that we do see now all of the activities, but we only see the most important flows through the process. So only once we also pull up the path slider to 100%, we see exactly a one-to-one representation of what's in the data. So now what we can see is actually those 3 that were going this way. Right? So this whole arrow was hidden before to make the process map simpler. And in this particular example, it's not that clear why you would want to do that, right? You usually want to look at everything if you can. So I want to show you a more realistic example just for a second to show you how it usually looks like. And for this process, the process doesn't really matter right now. We have also a case ID, an activity name, a timestamp. This is this refund order process actually that you saw the swim lane preview based on before. Now, if you look at this process here. It looks quite readable, but this is a simplified version. So if we would look at everything for this one, you can see how it looks like, right? It's what we, in the process mining world, we call this spaghetti process or spaghetti problem. And so it's not that this process map isn't correct or that there are mistakes in it, but it's just that it's not useful, right? If you see every little exception, every little detail, you can't derive any meaningful information from this anymore. So what we need to do here is to simplify it. And there are different ways to do it. So the sliders are just 1 out of 9 strategies that you can use for that. But if we apply this one here, we can already simplify it quite a lot. And so if we then look at the process map again, if I zoom in, then maybe, yeah, what you will see is that the simplification actually works by taking the structure of the process into account, right? So the process mining algorithms, they are looking at the structure of the process. For example, you see some quite low frequent paths are still in here. For example, here we have 2 paths which were just followed twice, and we can't set the path slider any lower, right? But it is still here because from the perspective of this low frequent activity request rejected, which just occurred 4 times, these are the 2 most important paths to keep it connected with the rest of the process. So this is what the process mining algorithms under the hood are doing, right? Looking at the actual process structures and doing these kind of simplifications in a way that take that into account. Now to go back to our initial example, I'm going back to the purchasing process. It's important to realize that the goal of a process mining analysis is not just to create this process map. We could export this now as a PDF file, for example, put it in a presentation, or print it out and put it up the wall. But the goal is, or the power of process mining is that you can now very quickly and interactively analyze this process based on the data, right, in the process mining tool. For example, let's say we have received complaints about the throughput time for this process, and it should be finished within 21 days. That's the goal and the service level agreement we have within our company. So I can go to the statistics tab and I can look at the, for example, case durations, where I then will see, well, most of the cases are finished within 16 and 17 days, but so within the 21-day limit, but 80, 90, and also 100 days are also happening. So these are completely out of the limit for what we have set our goal to be. And what we want to do next is to look at where in the process we are actually losing so much time that we have 80, 90 days throughput time. So I'll show you this in a moment. But before I go there, I want to show you that we can go one level deeper, right? So from the statistics, which are giving some overview, we can go to the cases where we can really look at individual cases. For example, this is purchase order 1417, and we see these 5 steps happen, these people were involved. So this is in practice really important because you can always go back to some example, right, for root cause analysis and to talk to the people to understand what was happening. And what we also have here is a list of the variants. For example, we can see that those 608 cases went through 98 variants, and the most frequent variant covers 88 cases, which makes up 15% of the data set, all going through these 18 steps in this order. So we can look at, for example, the top 5 or top 10 variants to see what was happening. And so let's look at those long-running cases, though, to inspect them in more detail. We could look at some extreme ones, right? For example, if we look at a very long case, we can go to the case and just look at, well, what's happening in this particular one, just to make sure we understand that the data is actually correct, for example. But let's go back to the map and look at the map and focus just on those long-running cases. So I'm adding a filter here, and in this case it's a performance filter, where let's put the 21-day limit, which is the SLA that we have defined for us, and we save this as an SLA analysis. And we apply the filter. So what we see here in the lower left corner is a reminder that we are not looking at the full data set anymore, but we are looking just at the 15%, right? Just at the 92 out of the 608 cases, only the 92 for which the whole process took longer than 21 days. Only for those, we now see the process map visualized. And we can see that this rework loop has become even more dominant than before. We are going almost 3 times per case on average through this loop. And if we look at the case frequency, 86 out of the 92 cases go through this extra step, right? Some more than once. But actually, what we are most interested now in is the waiting time. So I'm going to the mean durations, which is using the timestamps in the data sets to look at how much time are we actually spending in the process in different places. And what we can see if we zoom into this problematic part is that not only are we going through this step unnecessarily often, but if we do this, the step itself doesn't take that long. It just takes 10 minutes on average. But afterwards, we are taking more than 2 weeks waiting time or idle time where nothing happens, right? So this is the time after this previous step has finished before the next one starts, where really nothing is happening for 2 weeks. And we also have these delays piling up in other places. And the thing is, the process mining tool, of course, cannot give you an answer about what the reason for that is, right? We see we have a bottleneck in this particular activity, but there can be different reasons behind that. It could be that we have, a lot of work piling up and not enough people. Then we need to add resources to this particular step. It can also be that there is like a manager, for example, who collects all the requests that they're getting, and then once a month they're collecting them or preparing and processing them. And in this case, we have to talk to this manager to convince them to change their way of working. So process mining does not automatically give us the answers, but it shows us where the problem area is, and it helps us visualize. And the visualization aspect is really important to communicate with the people working in the process. We can look at it in this kind of static way, but we can also replay the process actually, which can be quite powerful in communicating this to the people who ultimately you have to engage them in the project, right, to help you change the things that you found. So in this animation, we now see a dynamic replay of the data based on the timestamp. So we replay every case, every yellow dot is one case, it's one purchase order moving through the process, and you have the timeline running here at the bottom. And so if I go a little bit more into the middle of the data set that we have, then we actually can see it quite clearly, right? So you really see like where things are really slow, and if a lot of cases are piling on top of each other, the bubbles become bigger. So you literally see where things are slow, and that makes it more tangible and helps you to communicate such a problem with the people in this process. Now to show you one last example for a compliance analysis. I'm going back to the full data set, and I hope my power is not going out right now. So let's look at the end of the process, where we can see that there are 10 cases bypassing a mandatory step in this process. So that's another example where I'm not looking at performance, but I'm actually looking at a way in the process that's not allowed, right? So if I click on this and I say filter this path, I can actually go to these 10 cases where that happened, and I can actually look at those cases and say, well, okay, here we had this deviation that we that was not allowed, and we can speak to the people that were involved. And last thing, we can actually look at this process in different ways. For example, if we say we have completely analyzed the activity flow, now we want to look at the organizational perspective. So if we do that, we can change like kind of the view we are taking on the process by now looking at the handover of work between people, right? So now we see not exactly the sequence of steps, but what we are seeing is more or less the transfer of work between different groups or different people, and we can see where there's ping-pong behavior, inefficiencies like that, or where there's a delay, for example, between one group who isn't responsible anymore and the new group who isn't responsible yet, and things get stuck there and lost. So process mining is like a very powerful tool to let me just close the software to save some battery. I really hope it will make it a little bit longer. To illustrate processes in this way. And when you show this to people in companies, what really happens is that you get kind of two types of reactions. And the first type of reaction is that people say, well, I knew it, right? So they are not surprised. They are actually the ones that had the right intuition, kind of the right gut feeling. And they're often actually quite happy what you showed them, because it confirms something that they knew all along, right? So for them it's not new at all, but they're really happy that they can now show other people that this is really happening. And at the same time, there's also people who are saying, well, that can't be. Maybe the system doesn't even allow for that, right? Or so they're surprised that this is even happening. And then usually the good thing is that you can actually go into the examples, right? You can look at a concrete case and you can look up and you can see what is happening there to confirm, is it something that happened in the data, on the data pre-processing side, or is it something that happened, that has really has happened in the process. And sometimes you also find in a discussion in the group that there are like two people who are saying, like one person says that's not possible, and then the other person says, well, but that's how we do it all the time, right? So you have different roles that process mining can bring together for these different people. So what I want to close with is just an overview of some of the use cases that we see in practice. And the interesting thing is that you can use process mining in many different areas. So for example, you can see that there are quite some different roles here that are shown on the slide, where in a company process mining can be used. And they use the same tool, but they answer different questions because they have different responsibilities, right? So for example, an auditor is much more interested in kind of conformance types of analysis. So they're looking at kind of control questions. They need to make sure the process is followed in a particular way, while a data science team is usually looking at data sets and answering specific business questions for the business unit that they are supporting. So I wanted to show a few examples from different areas to close this talk. And the first one is from an auditor perspective. So yeah, we have this conference actually once a year, which is called Process Mining Camp. It's taking place in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And that's a practitioner conference where companies share their experience with process mining among each other. And in 2014, Erik Davila from KPMG shared some examples from the auditing perspective. So what he found is that as an auditor, it's really helpful to use process mining because you can look at the process based on facts, right? Also today, the auditors are actually looking at documentation or asking people like how the process works rather than looking at data. And yeah, that you look at the actual deviations, and also that actually it helps to visualize the findings because they have to make an audit report for the customer. And if someone of you is interested in the auditing kind of use case, I recommend, I can share the slides by the way, so if you get the slides at the bottom, if you see this gray bar, that's a link you can click on to get to an article or some more information. And this is an article to a case study where they were looking at a purchasing process in a bank where already the regular annual audit had taken place, right? So they do this based on samples, based on the regular audit practice, and then they looked at the same process with process mining afterwards, and they compared what they found compared to what the regular internal audit found, and there were quite some things that they found that were missed in the regular audit, so that's an interesting one. In terms of process improvement teams, so most companies today, they have like process improvement teams, like Lean Six Sigma teams, BPM, process excellence groups, right, who act as a central expertise team who work with different business units to help them analyze their processes and make them efficient. And so there are many nice examples there. And process mining fits into these existing methodologies. For example, one of the main frameworks for Lean Six Sigma projects is this called DMAIC, Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, Control framework, where you go through these improvement phases, and you can use process mining in each of these phases. And one example that was also presented at Process Mining Camp was by Frank van Geffen from the Rabobank, who in 2014 shared an example from looking at an incident management process, where they were looking at an incident process and they found it took 8 days for a broken monitor that was reported by an employee in the bank until it was resolved. And not just that it took a long time, it took many steps to do that. So every footstep is like one time that someone is doing something with this incident in the system, right? And this should be a two-step process, because for broken monitors, they have warranty contracts in place with the monitoring manufacturer. And but what they noticed is there were 11 steps that they had to go through, right, to solve this. And they were looking at the process from different perspectives. Like I've shown you, we can look at the data from different angles, and this is kind of a high-level view where you just see the organizational main units, how they are communicating. And at the top this is the service desk of the bank. To the left, you see the external supplier with whom they have the warranty contract. And it's quite interesting to see that, well, actually half of the cases that are reported come back to the bank, right? And also you have these extra steps happening in the different roles. So it's really curious why that happened, and they did this root cause analysis, and they found that once a case was reported at the supplier, they did not actually know physically in the building where the monitor was located. So they didn't have enough information to resolve it, and they had to go back and to ask for this additional information. So to solve this, what they did was quite simple. They put these barcode stickers, which were already on the laptops and on the computers, but not on the monitors yet, so that if a monitor breaks, they can just scan it and have all the information available. So this was a process improvement project mostly focused on saving steps and thereby saving work and resources and basically saving costs. Another example is from a process manager perspective, where usually it's the main important test aspects are the key performance indicators that are defined for your process area. So for example, there's one company in the Netherlands that makes precision metal, kind of customized for their customers. So for them, it wasn't about saving steps or making the process efficient. For them, the most important thing was throughput time, right? Because when they make a new product for the customer, then it goes through multiple steps, but only in the the inspection, they can see whether the produced product has the right quality, sufficient quality to ship to the customer. So the time it takes from the beginning to the end is the most essential thing. And they were already doing a lot of initiatives to get better at that. So they started with maybe 12, 14 weeks on average through the whole process. And then they had some improvement initiatives. So they got it down to 4 weeks on average, but then they couldn't go any further. And this is when they started looking for new methods, and they found process mining as a new technique they were trying, and it actually helped them to reduce the processing time further and to cut it in half, right? To go from 4 weeks down to 2 weeks. And here you see a little bit the development. And the reason, what they found why process mining was helping them to make this next extra step is that it's really accessible, and it's something that you can communicate with the people who are working in the line of business, the people who are really in the production process. They are not statisticians, right? They don't know about statistics or data mining, or it's hard to communicate to them something like probability plots that you might get out of a statistical tool like Minitab or SPSS, but they can understand the process flow. So they were actually looking at the process together, and basically it was facilitating some idea generation, so that they were talking about, well, okay, if you have this problem here, well, maybe I can adjust my schedule in this way, and if I do this differently, then the different parts of the process work together better. And so by having these sessions and these ideas from the people who are really working in the process, they could then derive new improvement suggestions that actually help them to make this transition down to 2 weeks. The last example I have is from the IT area. There are a lot of interesting IT use cases. For example, replacing legacy systems, right? If you need to replace a legacy system that maybe you don't even have anyone anymore who understands the language that it was programmed in. Usually they use code analysis techniques for that, but there are some nice examples where you can actually also look at the event logs that show how the legacy system is actually used to understand how you can replace it with a new system that does the same job. But another example that we see more frequently over the past years is called customer journey analysis. So with the customer journey analysis, you're not so much looking internally, how are we processing this claim or this order for the customer, but you're more looking like how does the customer interact with our company. Often you do this across multiple channels, right? Because customers communicate with you in different channels. But you can also focus on one challenge like the website or the app to see how are people going through this navigation. And there the goal is usually not efficiency or time, but you want to increase the customer experience, that the customer actually is able to use the website, for example, or the app to do what they want to do. So there's a nice example, like maybe the earliest example of using process mining for usability tests, where in the back what you see here is the usability lab of the Technical University in Eindhoven, where you see it's furnished a little bit like a living room. So the idea is that the participants who come in to do experiments, that they feel a little bit like at home, right? So not too much like a lab rat, but they are asked to perform some tests, and there's a video recording and everything is recorded and things like that. So in this experiment, was maybe 2006 or 2007, the experiment they made was with a television, like consumer electronics usability tests, and the ideal sequence of steps that they should follow is shown here. The goal of this task was to show one channel at the on the TV, and to have like in a small window in the corner a second channel in parallel, right? That's what they should achieve. And so what really happened, you can see here. It's, that's the real path that people went through. And what you notice is a certain pattern, like people went through the main menu, right? So if that's maybe you recognize that from yourself. If you can't find something somewhere, you go to the main menu and you try to see, can you find your way back from there? And so this by itself is not a surprise for the people making the television, right? But what they are interested in then is, well, where are people falling off the cliff and going to the main menu, so that we can maybe have some ideas about how we can improve those kind of screens, maybe making a different text or the design differently or things like that. In this particular experiment, what was interesting is that there were actually two groups of people. So the people who said about themselves, I'm comfortable with computers and technology, and then the group of people who said, yeah, I'm not so familiar with computers. This is actually the technologists group. So if we look at the people who are not so familiar, it's even more complicated, and not everyone made it, right? There was a timeout where things were cut off. Now, I hope this gives you a little bit of an overview about the kind of the type of very different use cases that you can have for process mining. And really every process where you can find a case ID, an activity name, and a timestamp is applicable to this. So you can just put the data together, get it out of the system in some form, and then put it in the process mining tool to analyze the process further. So yeah, I hope I managed to make you a little bit enthusiastic about the topic. And if you want to learn more about it, here are some more points. As I said, I will share the slides. There is a book written by Professor Wilf van Aalst, who started the research topic. It's giving a good overview about the state of the art, also about the type of research that has been done and the kind of algorithms underneath that are used for those types of analysis. There's also an online course on Coursera, a MOOC, which is has been developed by Professor Wilf van Aalst and accompanies the book, so that you have video lectures that you can follow really to learn about the scientific approaches behind it. And there is open source software too, so on Prom Tools you find an academic tool set which is open source, and all the researchers develop their new techniques in this Prom framework. So that's also used in the MOOC along with our software Disco. And we are more focusing on the practical application side. So for example, rather than knowing about the algorithms, when you want to use process mining in practice, it's really important to know what the right methodology is for the project, how to clean the data, how to find and fix and clean data quality problems, what questions you can answer, and how it fits into your improvement initiative. So these are all topics that we have started to collect on our own process mining book. You can find it at processminingbook.com, and it's, as you can see, the topics are really like the process mining practitioner relevant topics. So it's very complementary to the scientific overview from Professor Wilfenaal's book and the course there. And yes, we have this conference also where next year, maybe if you're in the area, you can see some practitioners. We also have a mailing list where you can sign up, and then you get the video recordings from all the talks, and you can watch some of them on YouTube already right now. Okay, of course, if you want, you can also just try out, play a little bit with some of your own data. That's usually the best way to learn about it. So we are really happy to support this in all ways we can. I have some trial evaluation license codes with me. You can always just email us to get one. There's no costs involved, just to start playing with it. We also have an academic program. So if you're affiliated with a university, you can use the software with an academic license free of charge anyway. So please let us know if we can help. And thank you for your attention.
Great. That was really cool. Questions? Yes, please. А давай ты говори, я буду озвучивать.
Yeah, I have a purely practical question. Does the software has any integration capabilities with an ERP systems? For example, with an SAP ERP system? I mean, seamless integration capabilities, not like export data to CSV file and then upload it to your software.
Yeah, the question is whether there are integration possibilities with, for example, an ERP system. And so what happens in practice, it's two phases. You have two phases in a process mining project. The first one is the extraction of the data and the preparation of the data. And the truth is that how much work you have to put in the data preparation, it varies. So sometimes the data is readily available. If you have a workflows tool or some IT service management system, you have a ticket number, the status changes, you can export, you can go without any further steps. Within an ERP system, for example, it's more work because you have to go into the different tables. So for each process, you actually have to know which tables you have to go through to find the dates, to make the timestamps for your data set. But the good thing about ERP systems like SAP, for example, is that they have the same structure or a very similar structure at every customer. So if you have done this for purchase to pay or for an order to cash process at one customer, it's very similar at another one. So in terms of integration, we have an API, a REST API in Disco, where you can, rather than importing a file, you can get data from a server, and this is can be used to integrate in an environment so that you can get the data out there. But it's not something that we would do ourselves, but we have partners that specialize on different kind of systems, like for example ERP. So it's more on a case-by-case basis, but we can discuss what you want to know, and I can give some more pointers for this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Dmitry. I have probably a bit methodological question. By the way, I'm currently reading through the book, the process mining textbook. It's quite a good book. My question about modeling the structure of events. As process mining is based on events, on the log of events, and events can be quite complex. So, do you know how can I model a structure of event in a proper way if I have some understanding of my data generation process? Are there any methods, approaches, techniques to make it in a good way?
How do you mean model events? So what kind of data requirements you should meet? Or?
Yes. Well, you see, what's event? It's basically some properties attached to timestamp. We can understand it in that way. So basically, my properties of my events, they could be quite difficult. I don't know the whole scope of them yet, just some subset, but I want to model the structure of them in such a way and put them into IT system so as to I could build a process mining algorithm later based on that structure.
Yes, so maybe, so I think one thing, I'm not sure whether you mean that or not, but it's important, I think, to understand that with process mining, you're not modeling anything. So you're really taking the data and you're analyzing the process based on the data that is there.
Wait, I had a similar question. So, but in data, I mean, you assume that the number of labels is finite, right? But in real life, there could be kind of infinitely, so you need to introduce some abstraction, right? And your question is how to introduce the proper abstraction of event.
Well, yes, okay. So what you see, and I don't, it's a pity that I don't have the software. I could show you some examples because what you're doing is you're, with the 3 parameters that I mentioned, the case ID, activity name, timestamp, you are taking like the process frame on the data, right? And the activity name determines what you see in the process map. And you can do this in different ways. What the example I showed is that you can shift from different things, but you can also have different levels of detail for the activity name. By, for example, if you have 5 activities or 5 events that are quite low, kind of low granularity, very detailed, you want to have a higher level description, you would summarize them under the same name. And then you would not see 5 different activities in the process map, but as a result, you would just see 1. So these are things you can do.
Yes, and the question was, is it usually kind of ad hoc? You try to do this and that, or do you have any kind of recommending methodology? How to do abstraction, what to choose, right? That was the question.
It's usually based on domain knowledge that you do this. So you look what's related based on the insights of the domain knowledge.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The presentation. My question is regarding case ID. So in most of real-life processes, I would expect to see a complex hierarchy of the case IDs. Say we receive order from the client, Robert starts splitting them into child orders, so there are a new set of case IDs. Then they go into the market, there are trades, each trade is additional case ID. Then we start allocating trades, grouping them, and we have complex many-to-many hierarchy of case IDs. So how the system deals with the situation?
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. So the challenges that you get in the data are always in different places. So that's an interesting thing. Sometimes people say, well, probably it's always the case ID. Sometimes it's the case ID. Sometimes it's the activity name. If you have free text field, for example, then you have to pre-process it first to get to the right activity name. But for the case ID, you're right. This is one of the examples that people run into if they have a problem there. And so in some systems, like for example, if you look at an IT service management system, you have a ticket number. So it's a clear case. All the events are related to the same case, so you don't have that problem. But if you're going to an ERP system or some kind of production environment, this can happen. So you have, for example, one order that is delivered in 2 instances, or maybe even 2 orders that are combined in one delivery because they're going to the same customer. So then what is the case shifts over the time of the process, and this makes it really a challenge because of those many-to-many relationships that you mentioned. So the way to resolve that is that, so there's no easy way, but what you have to realize is that you have to make choices based on how you want to look at the process. Do you want to look at the process from the for example, the sales order perspective, or from the delivery perspective, or from the invoice perspective. And then you actually will create, not just what I've shown is that we can take the same data set and import it and look at it in different ways, but you will actually end up creating different data sets from the same many-to-many relationship data, because in the database then you have kind of a 3D reality, but if in order to get into some process mining data format, you also always have to make it flat. So we call it also flatten reality in the process mining world. So, and to flatten reality, you have to take a perspective, like an angle from which you look at it. So for example, from the sales order perspective or from the delivery perspective, and you would make different choices and you would get different process maps based on that. So I have an example. I can, if I write down your email, I can send you an example with which shows this in more detail. Yes.
Here, please.
So thank you for the presentation. I have a question regarding customer journey. So as far as I understood, process mining mostly looks into structured processes like purchasing or complaint, but regarding customer journey, any other processes which are unstructured, when you don't have any ideal process, so you can have 100 steps or 2 steps or I don't know, half a year, you don't know what the ideal processes looks like. So are there any resources or information or tips how to deal with this process?
Yes, yes. Actually, so process mining often is even more interesting for these unstructured processes than for structured ones, because you're even more interested in what actually happens, because you don't know beforehand how the process should be. And so it's not, so for process mining, to be able to apply it, you don't need a structured process, but you need structured data, right? So if you have unstructured data, which is not like, you need columns and rows essentially, but if you have that, in terms of the process, it can be very diverse. For example, and customer journeys are one example area where you see a lot. Like if you look at a website, how people are navigating through that space, then everyone is going a different route, a different path, right? So you see a lot of these kind of spaghetti maps. But another area where you also have a lot of flexibility is healthcare, for example. So if you look at a healthcare process, a diagnosis and treatment process for a patient, it's very easily the case that you have 1,000 patients and all of them go through a different path, because it's the flexibility is needed to find the right treatment for everyone. So in these very flexible and diverse processes, then you have to, it's even more important to use some of those simplification strategies. I've just shown you the one with the sliders where you interactively leave out some details, but there are other strategies also where you can, for example, focus on just a part of the process. So for example, in the customer journey analysis, often it's really important to be clear about what questions do you want to answer? What do you want to know about the customer journey? And then you would actually focus in your data on the whole spaghetti thing to cut out just this area that you're interested in, or filter down the data to a level that you can actually analyze it. So there are some strategies, I can also send you some pointers there that are specifically important for these types of processes, yes.
More questions? I have one more question. Yes. So what is the kind of main theoretical challenge in this field? Do you have one, like Fermat theorem or like classification of all types of processes, whatever?
Yes, yes. Well, we are not actively doing research anymore, but we are staying in close contact with research groups. So if I can, I go to sit in the meetings.
But then you're generating tasks for researchers, right?
Yeah. It's very good for them also to see what in practice people want to do. But it's a really active research field, so there's a million of things people are working on, and there are a lot of challenges in all areas. So even just to take the actual process discovery, so what we have in Disco is a very simplified version of displaying the process maps, and it's mostly because most our customers they're not trained process analysts, right? They are not working with Petri nets, for example, or even BPMN. Many of them don't know. They're really more on the kind of the domain expertise side and analyze their own processes. So for them, this is the right level of detail. But if you're looking at processes where you have parallelism, for example, you need more precise and higher level languages, like for example BPMN or Petri nets, and to discover like a good model based on data in one of these higher level languages, it's really difficult. So there have been over the years, it started with discovery, the whole process mining area, and there have been at least 30 different, maybe more different algorithms and very different types of approaches, like for example, genetic mining approaches, heuristic, very deterministic, how you get from the data to the model, but it's not a solved problem. It's not that there's like this one algorithm that's giving the best results, but people are still doing research even on this very fundamental level. But you also have a lot of research around that by, for example, combining this type of process mining things. You can really combine it in many interesting ways with data mining approaches, right? So we had, back then we were looking into decision mining, where we were looking into, for a specific choice point in the process, can you infer from the data by combining it with some classification mining, which route in the process people take based on the attributes. And this is just one example. There's a lot of things still to do.
Cool. Thank you. More questions? Thank you again. Ну, сейчас уже кофе-брейк, там уже еда есть, сейчас пойдете. Я поработаю 2 минуты пионер-вожатым. Смотрите, я когда мне студенты отправляю на конференцию, говорю, ребята, есть правило золотого сечения, там, не знаю, 30% и 70%. То есть неприлично посетить меньше 30% докладов и неприлично прогулять больше 30%. То есть надо что-то прогуливать, что-то посещать, но главное, чего приезжайте, это этих людей, которые рядом с вами увидеть. Я вас научу, значит, первый способ, как знакомиться, это вы с кем-то рядом сидите. Вот можете познакомиться, с кем вы рядом, повернитесь, спросите, ну я понимаю, что это уже детский сад, но это работает. Вот повернитесь, да, не знаю, спросите, а ты вообще откуда там, не знаю, чем занимаешься, как бы, и не пожалеете. Но если вы стесняетесь, скажите, все, организаторы сказали, теперь я все равно стесняюсь, но положено. Вот. Меня, знаете, нас заставили .ру. Вот. Второй, вы слушайте внимательно лектора и вопросы, потому что если человек задает интересный вопрос, это значит, он занимается, у него в голове то же самое, что у вас, как бы, и это повод подойти. И самое главное, конечно, докладчики, не упускайте людей, которых мы специально сюда привозим, там, не знаю, там, организуем, там, оплачиваем, как бы там приглашаем. Этот человек здесь уже, он, как бы, что называется, там, committed, так сказать, это самое. То есть уже он никуда не денется из этого зала, как бы, его можно хватать там за рукав, как бы там спрашивать, обсуждать, значит, там, не знаю, там, задавать удобные и неудобные вопросы. Пожалуйста, вот и для этого конференция нужна. Я понимаю, что вы все это и так знали, но вот сейчас кофе-брейк, это тоже повод скорее поговорить больше, чем поесть. Все, начинаем с кофе-брейк. Сейчас дальше мы по секциям, по расписанию. Посмотрите внимательно какой-то аудитории. Вот, не потеряйтесь.